The first thing I saw was my son's blood on the concrete, a dark line running beneath his cheek as two men dragged him toward the back door of the restaurant. I was standing across the street, frozen for half a second, because the face on the ground belonged to my 18-year-old son, Evan Carter, and the man kicking him in the ribs was wearing the same black jacket I had seen outside our house 3 nights earlier. My ears started ringing, the streetlights blurred, every muscle in my body tightened at once. I heard another man say, "Tell your father the payment is overdue." Evan tried to lift his head. He couldn't. His fingers moved against the pavement, searching for something that wasn't there. Then the man leaned down and whispered, "Next time, we break more than bones." That was when I stepped out of the shadows. There won't be a next time. Both men turned. One reached beneath his jacket. The other stared at me for a long second before recognizing the danger in my posture. They didn't know my name. They didn't know my history. They didn't know that for most of my adult life I had learned to remain calm while everyone else panicked. My name is Michael Carter. I was 44 years old, a husband, a father, and a former Navy SEAL sniper. I had spent years trying to bury that part of myself beneath ordinary life. I had left the teams, married my wife Rachel, raised Evan, and built a quiet career as a security consultant. I wanted grocery lists instead of mission briefings. I wanted school meetings instead of radio checks. I wanted my son to grow up believing his father was simply a man who loved him, but the moment I saw Evan lying on that pavement, something old and cold woke up inside me. I didn't charge, I didn't shout, I didn't threaten. I simply looked at the two men and said, "Walk away." The taller one laughed. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I looked at Evan again. His breathing was shallow. His shirt was torn. One eye was already swelling. I felt rage burning behind my ribs, but I kept my voice level. "I understand exactly who I'm dealing with." Sirens sounded in the distance. The men hesitated. They hadn't expected witnesses. They hadn't expected me. They ran. I dropped beside my son, Evan. His eyes opened. "Dad, I'm here." He tried to speak, but pain stopped him. I told them, "We can't pay." I looked toward the street where the men had disappeared. "Pay what?" Evan swallowed. "Protection money." My stomach turned. "Who?" He whispered one name. Rico Velez. I'd heard it before. Everyone in our neighborhood had. Rico wasn't a businessman, no matter how many restaurants he owned. He wasn't a community leader, no matter how many charity photographs showed him smiling beside politicians. He ran the local criminal network from behind legitimate businesses, and apparently my son had become his newest target. The ambulance arrived. Paramedics loaded Evan onto a stretcher. I stood beside him, gripping his hand while the lights flashed red across his face. "Dad," he whispered, "don't go after them." I looked at him. "Why?" He closed his eyes. "Because they're not afraid of anybody." I squeezed his hand. "Then they haven't met the right person yet." But as the ambulance doors closed, I noticed something on Evan's wrist. A thin red mark shaped like a number. It wasn't from the beating. Someone had deliberately written it there, and I knew immediately that whatever Rico Velez wanted, this wasn't just about money. At the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed above me while doctors worked behind swinging doors. I sat alone in a plastic chair, staring at my hands. They looked normal, clean, civilian, but my mind had already returned to another life. I remembered desert nights when the air smelled like dust and metal. I remembered lying motionless for hours while watching a distant compound through glass. I remembered the discipline required to wait when every instinct screamed to act. I had learned that patience wasn't weakness. Patience was control. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later. She rushed through the emergency entrance with tears in her eyes. "Where is he?" "They're treating him." She grabbed my shoulders. "What happened?" I told her. Her face went pale. "Evan never told us anyone was threatening him. He didn't want us worried." "He's 18, Michael. He's our son." "I know." She sat beside me, trembling. "Who did this?" I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "Rico Velez's people." Rachel stared at me. "The restaurant owner. That's what he wants everyone to think." She looked toward the treatment area. "Why would they target Evan?" "Protection money." Rachel's eyes filled with disbelief. "We don't owe them anything." Apparently they disagree. An hour later, the doctor finally came out. Evan had suffered several fractured ribs, a broken wrist, severe bruising, and a concussion. The doctor said he was lucky. Lucky. I hated that word. Luck had nothing to do with what happened. Someone had made a decision to hurt my child. That wasn't luck. That was a warning. When I entered Evan's room, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His face was swollen, and wires ran beneath his hospital gown. I sat beside him. "Tell me everything." He stared at the ceiling. "It started 2 weeks ago." He explained that 3 men had approached him outside his part-time job. They said our neighborhood was under their protection, and every local business and family was expected to contribute. Evan refused. He thought they were bluffing. Then they followed him home. He told me he had received anonymous messages. He hadn't shown us because he was embarrassed. "I thought I could handle it," he said. "You're my son. You don't have to handle everything alone." He looked at me. "Dad, there's more." He reached beneath his pillow and pulled out his phone. He showed me a photograph. It was an envelope containing cash. Underneath it was a note. "Payment protects families." I recognized the handwriting from the mark on his wrist. "Why the number?" I asked. Evan shook his head. "They marked everyone who refused." "Everyone? There are others." He told me about a local mechanic named Luis Ramirez, a grocery owner named Hannah Brooks, and a restaurant worker named Daniel Price. All had refused payments. All had been threatened. But Evan had discovered something else. Rico's organization wasn't just collecting money. They were using the payments to identify businesses that could be controlled, then forcing owners into laundering operations. Evan had accidentally witnessed a transaction behind a warehouse. He had taken a photograph. That photograph was now missing from his phone. "Did you send it anywhere?" I asked. "No." He looked frightened. "But they think I did." I felt the cold pressure settle into my chest. "What exactly did you see?" Evan hesitated. "A police car. A police car." One of the officers was talking to Rico. That changed everything. If law enforcement was compromised, we couldn't simply assume calling the police would solve this. But I refused to let suspicion become paranoia. I contacted Detective Sarah Miller, an officer I had known professionally for years. I showed her the evidence. She didn't dismiss it. She didn't promise miracles. She simply said, "Michael, if Rico has people inside the department, we need to know who, and if your son saw what he claims, his life is in danger." I looked through the hospital window at Evan. "He's already in danger." Sarah lowered her voice. "Then don't do anything stupid." I almost smiled. "You know me better than that." She studied my face. "That's exactly what worries me." That night, while Rachel stayed beside Evan, I returned home alone. The house was silent, too silent. I walked through every room, checking doors and windows. Then I found an envelope beneath our front door. Inside was a photograph of Evan leaving school. On the back were 6 words, "You should have paid when asked." I stared at it until my fingers went numb. Whoever delivered it had been close enough to watch my family, and that meant the enemy wasn't outside our lives anymore. They were already inside the perimeter. The next morning, I began with information, not confrontation. I called Detective Sarah Miller and asked her to meet me somewhere private. We chose a quiet diner outside the neighborhood. She arrived without her uniform and placed a folder on the table. "Rico Velez has been on our radar for 4 years, she said. "We've never had enough evidence to charge him with the serious offenses. Because witnesses disappear, businesses suddenly change their stories, records get altered, cases collapse." I opened the folder. Photographs showed Rico standing beside businessmen, politicians, and several police officers. "This officer," I said. "I saw him in Evan's photograph." Sarah nodded. "Officer Thomas Keller. Is he dirty?" "I don't know yet." She leaned closer. "But someone inside the department has been leaking information." I told her about the envelope. Her expression hardened. "Don't tell anyone else about that." I wasn't planning to. She looked at me carefully. "Michael, I know your background." I said nothing. "I know you were a SEAL. Former. I know what that means." "No, Sarah, you know what you've read." She held my gaze. "Then tell me what you're thinking." I looked out the window. "I'm thinking Rico believes fear makes people predictable. And he's right." She sighed. "Don't turn this into a war. I'm trying to prevent one." We spent hours comparing information. Rico's operation appeared to have 3 layers. The visible businesses, the collection network, and a hidden group that handled intimidation and financial transfers. Sarah believed the real strategist was someone named Victor Hale, a former financial advisor who had disappeared from public records years earlier. Rico was the face, Victor was the brain. That explained why the operation was more organized than a neighborhood gang. It was a business built around fear. When I returned to the hospital, Evan was awake. "Dad, how are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." "That's because you were treated like one." He smiled weakly. Then his expression changed. "Did you talk to the police?" "Yes." "Do they believe me?" "They believe enough to investigate." He looked relieved. I pulled up a chair. "I need you to tell me about the photograph." Evan explained that he had accidentally captured a license plate belonging to a city vehicle parked behind Rico's warehouse. The vehicle wasn't assigned to that area. He had taken the photograph because he thought it was suspicious. Then he noticed a man entering the vehicle. That man was Thomas Keller. "I knew something was wrong," Evan said. "I just didn't know how wrong." I asked him where the original photograph had gone. "They took my phone." "Did they erase it?" "I don't know." I nodded. "We'll find out." Before I left, Evan grabbed my wrist. "Dad, promise me you won't hurt anyone." I looked at him. "I promise you I won't let anger make decisions for me." He studied my face. "That's not the same promise. It's the honest one." That evening, I drove past Rico's restaurant without stopping. I observed from a distance. 3 men outside, 2 cameras, 1 black SUV, a side entrance, a second-floor office. Nothing unusual enough to justify action. That was the point. Criminal organizations survive because they look ordinary from the outside. But as I drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number contained a photograph of Rachel leaving the hospital. Beneath it were the words, "We know where everyone sleeps." I pulled the car over. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. They weren't just threatening Evan anymore. They were testing how far they could push me, and they had just made a mistake by showing me exactly how confident they were. For the next 3 days, I became invisible. I didn't confront Rico. I didn't visit his businesses. I didn't threaten his men. Instead, I worked with Detective Miller to protect my family and document everything. Rachel and Evan stayed at a secure location arranged through the department. Claire, my 21-year-old daughter, was brought home from college and told only what she needed to know. She was furious. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I didn't want you scared." "I'm already scared." I hugged her. "I know." Meanwhile, Sarah identified another victim, Luis Ramirez, the mechanic Evan had mentioned. Luis agreed to speak with investigators. He told them Rico's men had demanded $500 every month. When he refused, they damaged his shop. Then they threatened his wife. Another victim, Hannah Brooks, had received similar demands. A pattern emerged. Rico wasn't randomly targeting people. He was building a controlled zone. Every payment created dependency. Every threat created silence. Every compromised official protected the system. Then Sarah discovered something worse. Thomas Keller wasn't the highest-ranking officer involved. He had been receiving information from someone inside the prosecutor's office. The corruption went deeper, but evidence was still thin. We needed a clean case. That's when Evan remembered the missing photograph. "Dad," he said over a secure call, "I think I know where they took my phone." "Where?" "Rico's warehouse." "Why?" "Because one of the men who attacked me had a tattoo." He described it. Sarah recognized the symbol. It belonged to a private security company contracted by Rico's businesses. The company had access to the warehouse and several surrounding properties. We realized the warehouse might contain records proving the extortion scheme, but we couldn't simply storm it. We needed lawful evidence. Sarah arranged surveillance and obtained warrants based on the financial records already collected. The operation began before dawn. I stayed outside the perimeter with Sarah. I watched officers enter the warehouse. Minutes passed. Then radios crackled. "We found ledgers," another voice. "Multiple phones," another. "We've got payment records." Then Sarah looked at me. "This is bigger than we thought." Inside, investigators found records connecting Rico to dozens of businesses. They found photographs of people who had refused to pay. They found lists of police officers receiving cash. And they found Evan's phone. I felt my pulse spike. Sarah opened the device through proper evidence procedures. The photograph was still there. The license plate, the city vehicle, Thomas Keller. But there was something else in the metadata. A second image had been taken accidentally seconds later. It showed Victor Hale standing beside Rico. Victor was the man we hadn't been able to locate, and he wasn't meeting Rico in secret, he was directing him. Sarah stared at the screen. Now we have the chain. But before we could celebrate, one of the officers rushed outside. Detective Miller, we've got a problem. What? Someone knew we were coming. How? The back office was emptied before we arrived. Sarah's face hardened. How long? Maybe 20 minutes. She looked at me. I understood immediately. Someone had leaked the warrant. The question was no longer whether the department was compromised. The question was how high the leak went. And somewhere inside that organization, someone had just realized that Michael Carter was no longer sitting quietly at home. Rico disappeared that same morning. Victor disappeared too. The neighborhood became tense. Businesses closed early. People stopped answering their phones. Sarah told us the department couldn't guarantee absolute security because the leak hadn't been identified. I accepted that. I had spent years learning that certainty is a luxury. We moved Evan to another location. Rachel stayed with him. Claire went to stay with relatives. I remained with Sarah and a small group of trusted investigators. You understand what you're doing? Sarah asked. Yes. No, you don't. Rico knows your family. Victor knows your background. If they discover how much you know, they'll come after you directly. They already have, she sighed. You're not invincible, I know. Then stop acting like it. I looked at her. I'm not trying to be invincible. I'm trying to keep my son alive. That afternoon, Luis Ramirez called Sarah. His voice was shaking. They came back. Rico's men had entered his shop, demanding information about Evan. Luis refused. They threatened him. Sarah moved him into protective custody. Then another call came. Hannah Brooks had received the same demand. The message was clear. Rico believed someone had betrayed him. He wanted to know what Evan had told investigators. We decided to use that fear against him legally. A controlled witness operation was prepared. Luis agreed to communicate through monitored channels. He told Rico that Evan had mentioned a hidden ledger and that he knew where it was. Rico took the bait. He demanded a meeting. Investigators recorded everything. The meeting never became violent. Rico sent 2 intermediaries. They discussed payments, threats, and the location of the ledger. Their words created the evidence prosecutors needed. Then one intermediary mentioned Victor Hale. Victor wants the father handled first. Sarah looked at me when she heard the recording. I felt the room become very quiet. Handled how? The intermediary asked. The answer was simple. Permanently. I closed my eyes. I had expected threats. I had expected intimidation. But now there was evidence of a planned attempt against my life. The investigators wanted me moved immediately. I agreed. We prepared a safe location and began building the final operation. If you're enjoying this tactical justice story, make sure to subscribe for more stories about families who refuse to be broken, because from this point forward, every move Rico makes brings him closer to the evidence that will finally destroy his organization. That night, Evan called me. Dad, hey buddy. Are you okay? I'm fine. You're lying. I laughed softly. You sound like your mother. He was silent. Then he said, I keep thinking about those men. Don't. I should have fought them. No. Why not? Because surviving isn't cowardice. He breathed slowly. Are you going after them? I'm helping the police. That's not what I asked. I looked at the wall. I'm going to do everything legally possible to make sure they can't hurt anyone again. Promise? Promise. After the call, Sarah entered the room. We found Victor. I stood. Where? He contacted a lawyer. So he wants to surrender? No, he wants a deal. Sarah placed a photograph on the table, and he says he'll give us everything. I studied the image. What's the catch? Sarah's expression changed. He says he won't talk unless he knows you personally will be protected. I stared at her. Why would Victor care about me? Sarah shook her head. That's exactly what we're about to find out. Victor Hale agreed to meet at a federal facility under heavy protection. He was thinner than his photographs suggested, with tired eyes and the expression of a man who had spent years believing he was smarter than everyone around him. He sat across from Sarah and me. Rico is finished, he said. So are the others. And you? Sarah asked. I'm offering cooperation. I leaned forward. Why? Victor looked at me. Because Rico was never the real threat. You are, not anymore. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank records, payment schedules, photographs, and names. Enough to expose the entire organization. Why give us this? I asked. Victor looked directly at me. Because the people above me are worse. Sarah's eyes narrowed. There are people above you? Victor nodded. Rico answered to me. I answered to a larger network. He explained that the extortion scheme was only one operation. The larger network moved illegal money through construction companies, property firms, and shell organizations. Rico had been ordered to expand the protection racket because it generated untraceable cash. Evan had become dangerous because he photographed the wrong vehicle and accidentally captured evidence connecting the local operation to the larger network. Why target his father? I asked. Victor hesitated. Because they researched you. And? They discovered your military background. Sarah glanced at me. Victor continued. They were afraid you would recognize the pattern. I almost laughed. So they attacked my son because they were afraid of me? They thought hurting him would make you predictable. I stared at him. They were wrong. Victor nodded. Yes. He then gave investigators the name of the person coordinating the operation. Not Rico, not Thomas Keller, someone named Adrian Cross, a businessman who owned several construction firms and had appeared at charity events with city officials. Cross had been financing the entire network. The evidence led to warrants across multiple locations. Arrests followed over the next several weeks. Thomas Keller was arrested. The prosecutor's office official involved in the leak was arrested. Rico was found hiding in a rented apartment and taken into custody without incident. Adrian Cross attempted to flee but was captured at an airport after investigators intercepted the transfer of funds. The operation collapsed. There was no dramatic gunfight, no revenge execution, no secret battlefield. There was paperwork, evidence, surveillance, warrants, testimony, and months of court proceedings. That was justice. It was slower than revenge. It was less satisfying in the moment. But it lasted longer. When Rico finally saw me in court, his expression changed. You, he whispered. I said nothing. He had expected fear. He had expected anger. What he saw instead was a father who had stopped giving him emotional control. After the hearing, Evan asked me, did it feel good seeing him arrested? I thought about it. It felt like the pressure finally stopped. Were you angry? Yes. Are you still? I shook my head. Anger is useful for a moment. Carrying it forever is another kind of prison. Evan nodded. He was still recovering physically. The scars on his wrist had faded. The bruises were gone, but the experience had changed him. He became quieter for a while, more observant, more careful. One evening, he asked me about my SEAL career. Were you ever afraid? I told him the truth. Always. Then how did you do it? Training taught me what to do while afraid. He thought about that. Maybe that's what I need. You don't need to become me. I know, he smiled. I just want to know how to protect myself. I put my hand on his shoulder. Then I'll teach you. The months that followed were quieter, but not easy. Evan went through physical therapy. Rachel attended every appointment. Claire returned to college but called every night. I helped Sarah prepare testimony for the corruption cases. The neighborhood slowly changed. Businesses reopened. People began speaking openly about what had happened. Luis Ramirez rebuilt his mechanic shop. Hannah Brooks expanded her grocery store. Several victims testified publicly. The fear that had protected Rico's organization began to disappear. That was the part criminals never understand. Fear only works when everyone believes they're alone. Once people stand together, the entire structure weakens. Evan eventually returned to school. He didn't tell everyone what happened. He didn't want attention. He simply focused on graduating. One afternoon, his teacher called me. Your son has been asking unusual questions about digital evidence. I smiled. That sounds like him. He's very analytical. He always has been. At home, Evan showed me a project he had built for school. It was designed to organize publicly available information about fraudulent businesses and identify suspicious patterns. I told him to keep everything legal. He rolled his eyes. I know, Dad, I laughed. Good. Then he became serious. I don't want another family to go through what we did. That sentence stayed with me. The experience had hurt him, but it hadn't broken him. He had chosen purpose instead of bitterness. Meanwhile, Rachel and I had difficult conversations. She admitted she had been terrified during the weeks of threats. She had watched me change. You became someone I hadn't seen before, she said. The old Michael. I looked at her. He's always been there. I know. She took my hand. But I also realized why you left that life. I nodded. I didn't want our children growing up around violence. And now? I looked at Evan laughing in the backyard. Now I want them to understand that strength doesn't mean violence. That became our family lesson. We weren't going to let the criminals define us. We weren't going to let fear become our identity. Evan eventually asked me to take him to the ocean. We sat on the beach at sunset, listening to waves break against the shore. "Dad," he said, "when you saw me that night, what were you thinking?" I looked at him. "Honestly? Yeah. I thought I was going to lose you." He looked down. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize for what they did. I just wish I'd told you sooner." "So do I." He looked at me. "You really would have done anything for me?" I smiled. "Anything that kept you alive and didn't destroy who I was." He nodded slowly. "That's different from revenge." "Exactly." The sun disappeared below the horizon. For the first time since the attack, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Peace. Not because the danger was gone forever. Nobody gets that guarantee. But because my son was alive, my family was together, and the people who had tried to control us had failed. The criminal network was dismantled. The evidence was public, the corrupt officials were facing justice, and Evan had learned something far more valuable than how to fight. He had learned when not to. A year after the attack, Evan stood at his high school graduation wearing a dark blue suit and a smile I hadn't seen in months. Rachel cried before his name was even called. Claire recorded everything on her phone. When Evan walked across the stage, I felt my chest tighten. I remembered that hospital room. I remembered his bruised face. I remembered the blood on the pavement. Then I looked at him standing tall beneath the lights. That memory suddenly felt like it belonged to another lifetime. After the ceremony, Evan hugged me. "We made it." I smiled. "You made it. We all did." He was right. The attack had changed every one of us. But it hadn't defined us. Later that evening, he asked me to show him the old photograph from my SEAL days. I had kept it locked away for years. I finally brought it out. He studied the men standing beside me. "You looked so serious." "We were. Did you ever miss it?" I thought for a moment. "Sometimes." "Would you go back?" "No." "Why?" I looked at him. "Because I already have what I was fighting for." He smiled. "Us. Exactly." That night, I finally told Evan more about my past. Not operational details, not secrets, just the lessons. Discipline, patience, observation, responsibility, the ability to control fear without pretending it doesn't exist. "Dad," he said, "I think that's why you didn't go after Rico yourself." "Partly, you could have." I shook my head. "Maybe, but the goal wasn't to prove I could hurt him. The goal was to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone again." Evan sat quietly. Then he said, "That's a better kind of revenge." I smiled. "It's not revenge." "What is it?" "Justice." He nodded. Over the following years, Evan studied cybersecurity and emergency management. He became interested in protecting small businesses from extortion and digital fraud. He volunteered with community organizations that helped victims understand how criminal networks manipulate fear. He never forgot what happened. Neither did I, but remembering didn't mean living in the past. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, we visited the neighborhood where it happened. We would stop at Luis's shop. He would shake Evan's hand and tell him how proud he was. Hannah would send us home with groceries. The neighborhood had transformed. The old fear was gone. People watched out for one another. That was the real defeat of Rico's organization. They hadn't just lost money. They had lost the silence that made their power possible. One evening, Luis told me, "You know what changed everything?" I asked what. He pointed at Evan. He refused to be ashamed. I looked at my son. Luis continued, "Those men wanted everyone to believe we were weak. Your boy proved they were wrong." I felt something warm in my chest. Evan wasn't a weapon. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a young man who had survived something terrible and chosen not to become terrible himself. That mattered more than any military title I had ever carried. Years later, Evan asked me a question that took me completely by surprise. "Dad, do you regret teaching me how to stay alert?" I thought about it. "No." "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." He nodded. By then he had built a career helping organizations detect financial fraud and protect vulnerable communities. He used technology to find patterns that criminals believed were invisible. Sometimes he would joke, "I learned from the best." I always corrected him. "You learned from experience." He would smile. "That too." Rachel and I remained together. The attack had tested our marriage, but it had also forced us to speak honestly about fear, protection, and trust. Claire became a physician and eventually started working with trauma patients. She said the experience had changed the way she understood fear in other people. Each of us carried something from that night, but none of us carried it alone. One evening, I found Evan sitting on the porch looking through an old photograph. It was the picture from the graduation ceremony. "You look happy," I said. I was. Thinking about the attack? A little. I sat beside him. "What do you think about when you remember it?" He took a breath. "I remember being afraid, but I also remember you showing up." I looked at him. "I was your father. You were more than that." I shook my head. "No, I was exactly that." He smiled. "Maybe that's why it mattered." We sat quietly, then he asked, "Would you change anything?" I considered the question. "I'd want to know sooner. I'd want you to trust us sooner. I'd want your pain to never happen." "But you can't change it." "No. Then maybe it happened for a reason." I looked at him. "Be careful with that idea." "Why?" "Because terrible things don't need a reason to happen. Sometimes we simply choose what they mean afterward." Evan nodded. That became the final lesson. The attack had been cruel and unnecessary. It had nearly destroyed our sense of safety. But we had chosen to make something constructive from the wreckage. Rico wanted money. Victor wanted control. Adrian Cross wanted an empire. They all believed power came from making other people afraid. They were wrong. Real power came from being able to stand after fear had passed. It came from choosing integrity when revenge was easier. It came from protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. It came from refusing to become the person your enemy expected you to become. My SEAL training had taught me how to remain calm under pressure. Fatherhood taught me why. Evan taught me something else. Sometimes the person you think you're protecting becomes the person who reminds you what you're protecting in the first place. That night on the pavement had begun with blood, fear, and a threat. It ended years later with my son standing beside me, healthy, successful, and free. That was enough. I still remember the sound of Evan saying, "Dad," from that hospital bed. 2 words, 1 voice. And somehow those words carried more weight than every mission briefing I had ever heard. Because I had spent years believing that courage was about confronting danger. Parenthood taught me that courage is also knowing when to step back, when to call for help, when to trust evidence, and when to refuse the temptation to become the monster standing across from you. Rico Velez believed my son's pain would make me reckless. Victor Hale believed fear would make our family surrender. Thomas Keller believed a badge could protect him from consequences. Adrian Cross believed money could buy loyalty forever. They were all wrong. My son survived. My family survived. The neighborhood survived. And the criminal network that had made people afraid for years collapsed because ordinary people finally stopped believing they were powerless. I never fired a shot that night. I never needed to. My most important weapon wasn't a rifle. It wasn't military training. It was discipline. It was evidence. It was patience. It was the refusal to let anger choose my next move. There are people who hear a story like this and imagine revenge as the satisfying ending. They picture an enemy getting exactly what they deserve. But real life isn't a movie. Real justice takes time. It requires witnesses. It requires records. It requires people brave enough to tell the truth. And sometimes, it requires a father to swallow his anger because his son needs him alive and present more than he needs him to be feared. Evan's scars eventually faded. Some memories didn't. But scars aren't always reminders of weakness. Sometimes they're proof that the body and the spirit both know how to heal. Today, when Evan tells people about his work, he doesn't talk about the men who hurt him. He talks about the people he wants to protect. That's how I know they didn't win. They wanted him afraid of the world. Instead, he decided to make the world safer for someone else. They wanted me consumed by anger. Instead, I became more patient. They wanted Rachel to live in fear. Instead, she became stronger. They wanted our neighborhood silent. Instead, people started speaking. That is why I don't call what happened revenge. I call it survival with purpose. If you're listening to this and you've ever been threatened, bullied, extorted, betrayed, or made to feel powerless, remember something. You don't have to become violent to become strong. You don't have to become cruel to become dangerous to people who do wrong. Sometimes the strongest response is documenting everything, protecting your loved ones, finding trustworthy allies, and refusing to give your enemy control over your character. Evan's attackers thought his father was an easy target because they didn't know who I had been, but they also misunderstood something more important. They didn't need to know I was a SEAL sniper, they needed to know I was his dad, and once they hurt my son, I would do everything within the law and everything within my power to make sure they could never hurt him again. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge asks, how can I hurt them? Justice asks, how can I stop them from hurting anyone else? I chose the second question, and that choice changed everything. So when I look back now, I don't remember Rico's face first. I remember Evan standing on that graduation stage. I remember Rachel crying. I remember Claire laughing. I remember Luis reopening his shop. I remember Hannah telling other business owners not to be afraid. Those are the images that replaced the blood on the pavement. Those are the memories that survived. And maybe that's the real ending. Not an enemy falling, not a victory speech, just a family standing together after someone tried to tear them apart. If you're watching this story right now, I want you to remember that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a father sitting beside his injured son and choosing patience. Sometimes it's a frightened witness deciding to speak. Sometimes it's a family refusing to surrender to fear. Sometimes it's a young man taking the worst experience of his life and turning it into a reason to protect others. That is what Evan did. That is what our family did. And that's why the people who attacked us ultimately lost the only thing that mattered to them: control. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. What kind of story do you want next? Military revenge, psychological thriller, or emotional family justice? And here's the question I want you to debate honestly. If you were in my shoes, after discovering that a criminal organization had brutalized your child and threatened your family, would you have waited for the authorities and trusted the legal system, or would the anger have pushed you toward taking justice into your own hands? Tell me what you would have done and, more importantly, why. Because sometimes the hardest battle isn't against the person standing in front of you, it's against the anger inside you, telling you to become someone you don't want to be. I learned that lesson long before the night Evan was attacked, but I understood it completely only after I became a father. Protect the people you love, stay calm when others want you afraid, stand together when someone tries to isolate you, and never confuse cruelty with strength. The men who attacked my son believed fear made them powerful. In the end, fear was the thing that brought their entire organization down. My son didn't need a weapon to defeat them. He needed someone to believe him. My family didn't need revenge to survive. We needed courage, patience, and the truth. And sometimes, that is more powerful than anything a criminal can threaten you with. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay strong, protect the people who matter, and I'll see you in the next story.
Welcome on Ox viewer, how are you? I hope you are okay. Thanks for supporting us. I am creator behind Karmanox, talking with you. If you like my video and share must be your friend and family. I am very happy you like my video and stories. I glad I am expect you, my family and friends, my all subscriber. So your any suggestion with me comments session box. I must be reply your comments and try to everyday best story provide you. You must be watch video and last minute. So again your thanks. Thank you so much and supporting my channel. I am very happy with you. You happy with me? I know you love my all story. You know I am too much effort creating story and choose visual camera videos, everyday recording camera videos and editing too many time expand one video. I will you upload and you see video very difficult this work, but I am happy you like my video and subscribe my channel and share